Let me tell you a story. Mr. Marvin Gaye. Brother Marvin. Let's talk about our brother. Bad blood between father and son. That's how the police described the events at the Marvin Gaye Sr. household on that day in Los Angeles. Bad blood between father and son. Bad blood. Is it possible to have bad blood between father and son? And just what is bad blood? What is bad blood? What does that mean? Marvin Pentz, P-E-N-T-Z, Marvin Pentz Gaye Sr., shot and killed his son, Marvin Pentz Gaye Jr., on April 1st, 1984. And Marvin Gaye Jr. was shot twice, as I said, with a gun that he bought for his father. A lot of us have heard this story before. And his father used that gun to end his son's life. This is what Wikipedia says about that. On Christmas Day, 1983, Marvin gave his father a Smith & Wesson .38 special pistol so that he could protect himself from intruders. Friends and family members contended that the younger Marvin was often suicidal and paranoid, and by now was afraid of leaving his room and spoke of little besides suicide and death. He sometimes wore 3 overcoats and put his shoes on the wrong feet. 4 days before his death, according to his sister Jean, Gaye had tried to kill himself by jumping out of a speeding sports car, suffering only minor bruises. Jean, that's the sister, contended that there was no doubt Marvin wanted to die and that he couldn't take any more. And that reminds me of what I remember reading about Phyllis Hyman. This is what Wikipedia says about her suicide note. I'm tired. Those of you that I love know who you are. May God bless you. I'm tired. Y'all heard that term that the elders say. Many of us have heard it. Y'all heard this? I brought you in this world and I'll take you out. Now, most of us, when we hear that, we hear it and we think, okay, go on, sit down somewhere with that. But we don't actually think, at least I never thought when I've heard that in my family, that anything like that would remotely be possible. That saying, I brought you into this world and I'll take you out, that appears to have been the case in this particular father-son story, Marvin Gaye Sr. and Marvin Gaye Jr. And it is a very long way, brothers and sisters, from being born in Washington, D.C. in 1939 to being shot twice. His father shot him once, then he moved in, shot him in the chest first, then he moved in and shot him in the shoulder at point blank range. It's a long way from being born in Washington, D.C. in 1939 to being shot twice by your father in a house in Los Angeles in 1984. That, brothers and sisters, is a long and winding road. How does it come to that, where your father takes a gun and ends your life? How does it all come to that? Let's talk about the father. Marvin Gaye Sr. was born the first of 15 children. The first of 15 children. 15 children in Kentucky. So let that sink in. That's a lot. 15 children in Kentucky. He had a troubled childhood where his physically abusive father would often beat his mother and 5 siblings. So that's a note. That's a note to make, that he came himself. This is the daddy. Gaye Sr. met his future wife, Alberta Cooper, whom he would marry on July 2nd, 1935. The couple bought a small house in southern Washington. Alberta already had a son named Michael, but believing he couldn't raise another man's son, Gaye Sr. sent Michael to live with his sister-in-law, Pearl. Another note, on April 2nd, 1939, their first son, Marvin Jr., was born. And then shortly after that, there were other children born. In 1970, Gaye would later, this is the father now. In 1970, Gaye Sr. would later father a son named Antoine Carey with another woman as a result of one of his extramarital affairs. So 40 years after he married this woman, Marvin Gaye's mother, he had an affair and fathered a son with one of the women he was having an affair with. That's the daddy. Alberta Gaye later stated that her husband hated Marvin Jr., as she told David Ritz in 1979. David Ritz is the biographer. He wrote Divided Soul, The Life of Marvin Gaye. This is what Marvin Gaye's mother, Marvin Gaye Jr.'s mother, told David Ritz in 1979. My husband never wanted Marvin, and he never liked him. He used to say he didn't even think he was really his child. I told him that was nonsense. He knew Marvin was his, but for some reason, he didn't love Marvin. And what's worse, he didn't want me to love Marvin either. Marvin wasn't very old before he understood that. Now here's what the father told David Ritz in 1979. It was important that I have a male child. A namesake is what I wanted. The day he was born, I felt he was destined for greatness. I thanked God for the blessing of his life. I thanked God for Marvin. I knew he was a special child. It goes on to say here that eventually Mr. Gaye, Sr., withdrew from social life. He was a very strict Christian man who belonged to a very specific sect of Christianity, SECT, that was very restrictive in its teachings. And it says here that he eventually withdrew from social life, developing alcoholism, and was involved in cross-dressing, which humiliated his son, who at the age of 12 spied on his father dressing in his mother's clothes. Let's let that sink in. At 12 years old, Marvin Gaye caught his father. Not even caught. He was peeping in on his father, dressing in his mother's clothes. Let that sink in. Following Marvin's musical career beginnings, he refused to be in the same room with his father for a number of years. This decision led to Marvin adding an E to his final name, which was done to quiet any rumors of his own sexual orientation, to emulate his idol Sam Cooke, and to add more distance from his father. So the family name is Gay. Marvin added an E. And I can understand why. You catch your father in the closet dressing up as your mother, and questions as a 12-year-old begin to develop for you. Most notably, am I the same way? I think any of us would ask that at that age in our journey. So years later, when he was putting himself forward before the public, he added an E to his name. It also takes me back to something that I read in this book, The Strength of a Woman, the Phyllis Hyman story by Jason A. Michael. The Strength of a Woman, the Phyllis Hyman story by Jason A. Michael. On page 230, it says this: to select friends, she was more specific. She spoke of giving herself the gift of death for her birthday, that she was tired of it all, said one such friend who requested anonymity from the New York Daily News reporter he later spoke to. On Thursday, June 29th, Phyllis phoned Danny Poole, whom she'd kept in touch with sporadically in the years following her early 80s romance. Bluntly, she told him she planned to take an overdose of sleeping pills on July 6th, her 46th birthday. So when you think of both of them speaking of being tired, Marvin saying, I just can't take it anymore, you ask yourself, at least I ask myself, what is it I think about? Prince died of a drug overdose. Phyllis Hyman took overdose of pills, laid down, died before a performance that night. Marvin Gaye, how does it come to that, brothers and sisters? To want to destroy ourselves along the journey. What is that? At 44 years old, after all that we know about him, after owing the IRS millions of dollars and exiling himself to Ostend, Belgium, Ostend. It's a city in Belgium. That's where he went. He had a patron there, a man named Freddie Cozart, who befriended him and gave him shelter when he needed a place to go. And he actually got clean. He achieved sobriety over there in Belgium. And Midnight Love, his last album, was released, and Sexual Healing was on that album. And the acclaim of that single hitting the way that it did, becoming a hit, brought him back from Belgium over to the States to tour. And on that tour, or slightly before that tour, he resumed his relationship with cocaine and ended up in what is called cocaine psychosis. That's what it looks like when you heard earlier when I read from Wikipedia that he was wearing 2 or 3 overcoats. He was wearing a bulletproof vest that he insisted upon wearing all the way until he got on the stage, and then he would take it off because he thought that people were trying to kill him or out to get him. The paranoia that comes with extended drug use. That's what he was experiencing. So after all of that and that tour in '83, he moved into his parents' home in Los Angeles. So that's why he was in that house that day, because he had moved back there. Think of all the living our brother had done until that point in his life. And then he moved back into his parents' home, a house, by the way, that he bought them. He bought that house for them in Los Angeles. And he ended up moving back in that house, even though he and his father were on rocky terms. And it even says here, Frankie is his brother. And after the shots were fired that day in Los Angeles, Frankie ran into the house. I'm reading from Wikipedia. Frankie ran to the house and carefully walked into the hallway to his brother's room, not knowing if his father still had the gun, whether his father was still in the room, or if his brother was dead. After walking into Marvin's bedroom, an emotional Frankie held him as Marvin lay there, dying and bleeding rapidly. According to Frankie, Marvin, barely speaking above a whisper, told him, I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I had him do it. It's good. I ran my race. There's no more left in me. I ran my race. There's no more left in me. How does it come to that? How does it come to that, brothers and sisters? You grow up in a strictly religious household. You're indoctrinated with all those teachings. You love God. Love God. Talk about God all the time in your songs and your artistry. Love God. And how does life get you to a point where you buy a pistol for your father and and then create a circumstance where your father would take that pistol, because prior to his father killing him, basically, Marvin had whooped his ass, basically. He intervened on the mother and father arguing and basically whooped his father's ass. And that's when his father went into the room, got the gun that Marvin had bought him, and came back and killed him.